Greetings, my magnificent ones. Sue here, your magnificence mentor. Welcome to Magnify Your Magnificence. This is the podcast. If you're wrestling with doubts, you're wondering about, are you really good enough? Maybe you've had a little dose of imposter syndrome along the way that you'd like to sort out. Well, this is the place where we talk about all things magnificent, which of course you are. And we also take a look at some of the more challenging ideas and experiences that come at us to give us pause and want to make us investigate a little bit more. Well, what about that? And how does that relate to who I am and where I'm going in life? And all of those very thought-provoking questions that come up from time to time. This is a safe place for you to explore all of that. So just sit back. Today, our topic, I think I'm going to call it Find Clarity Around Boundaries. So boundaries has been a topic that I've been wrestling with for about 3 weeks now. The terminology is new to me. Growing up, when we talked about boundaries, it was physical boundaries particularly. It was, okay, there's the city limit. So there's a boundary around the land that belongs to the city. There was the farmyard would have maybe a fence or a hedge or something like that would separate the home farm from the pasture and so on from there. It was designed to keep things kind of contained, keep the animals where they belonged, keep people into a certain space. So, of course, we don't sleep out in the wide open spaces anymore. At least I don't. And so even if you're in a tent, you're in a confined area that keeps nature at bay a little bit. So boundaries for me were just things that if I thought of them at all, were just containment ideas for physical space. Now, if we broaden that, then a few years ago, people kept talking about their boundaries. Well, you have to set a boundary. If you don't like what's going on, you have to set a boundary. And I'm kind of going, what is that? Well, back in the day, it was a line drawn in the sand. And I'd seen it in a movie where the captain or the person in command would take his sword and draw a line in the sand and said, okay, who's with me? And anybody stepping over to where the captain was going to go with the captain. And anybody who didn't step over the line, well, I'm not sure what happened to them. But anyway, there was this line in the sand. So that was one use of that. Of course, the other use was don't cross this line. Like if you cross this line, we're going to have a battle. And so it was very much a threat. So that's what I knew about what we now call boundaries was there's a limit beyond which you cannot go. So some of that was physical, some of it was a psychological thing, and it related to our capacity to deal with whatever was in front of us. And so I guess a limitation, if you want to call it that, or a limit. We'd set a limit to this is as much as I can do. So there's a limit to how many ice cream cones I will eat before I'll say, oh, that's too much ice cream. And I'm an ice cream lover. So I have a limit. That is, no, I won't do that anymore. When I was younger, I might have done 1 or 2 more cones than I would do today. But I have this kind of self-imposed limit. So I guess you could call that a boundary. So about 3 weeks ago, I was at an amazing workshop called Grounded Confidence. It was an equine therapy workshop where we had some experiences with horses whom was quite nervous around because I got tossed off a horse that ran away with me when I was a teenager. So I was there as a growth experience for me to see what I could gather from that to help kind of rebuild my feeling around horses and shift it somewhat. And because I like horses a lot. But I thought, whoa, they're way bigger than me. And I didn't have this very good experience. So anyway, one of the topics after we did some debriefing for each of the exercises, the idea of boundaries came up. And there were some other participants that came face to face with their boundaries. And I've been a little bit puzzled because that wasn't my experience. And I'm going, well, what do they mean exactly? Like, what boundaries are they talking about? So then I'm puzzled. And it puzzled me enough that I spent time talking to other people about it. So what about boundaries? So in our Magnificence lab, my participants and I had a whole 90 minutes on well, what about boundaries and exploring that topic. And then we felt that we hadn't quite delved deep enough into it. So we're coming back this week to do exactly the same thing, to add some other pieces to it. So of course, in the meantime, I've had even more time to think about this and to explore this whole idea of boundaries, because one of the questions that came up for me was, well, if you have a boundary or a limit, does it prevent you from being all that you are? Does it prevent the magnificence that is you from coming forward? Well, I didn't exactly have an answer at that moment. So, of course, I'm mulling over, reviewing experiences and wanting to make sense of this. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. I'm not sure if I have any great number of answers, but I've answered a few of my own questions, and maybe it will raise some questions for you, because I think it's a topic that is really important, simply because so often we have these self-imposed limits and in some cases limitations that interfere at some point. And maybe they were limitations that were set long, long ago, and we're not even aware we still have them. So let me give you an example of that. So you may have, as I was, been told by our parents, do not talk to strangers. Well, of course, when we're little, 2, 3 years old, and we can understand what our parents are saying, don't talk to strangers. Well, it was their attempt to keep us safe because they didn't know the stranger standing in front of us, and they wanted to make sure that we didn't come to any harm. So without them being there, they left us with some guidance, and usually it was a command like, do not talk to strangers. Well, that probably served its purpose at that point in time, but you fast forward to being 20 and that program or that directive is still running for you, and you wonder why you hesitate to just talk to the person next to you sitting on the bus. Well, they're a stranger. Ooh, don't talk to strangers. Whoa. But what if you need help and you don't see anybody around that you know? So this causes this disconnect inside of us where we hesitate and then, of course, immediately go to fear and imagine all of these other things that could happen. But we're not 2 anymore. We're not 3 anymore. We're whatever age we are. And so, but the fear has been seeded as part of that directive. So that's one that until we question it, until we say, whoa, is that really true anymore? Is that valid? Maybe I can ditch that one. Maybe I can just throw it out with the trash or replace it with something that's more useful now. So this is what I've been exploring for myself. And when of the physical component of it. So we do each have, depending on what culture that you're from, we have a physical boundary around us that relates to physical closeness. So I think in North America, it's somewhere like 2 to 3 feet. Like most people that you don't know that well can get within 2 to 3 feet of you, maybe enough to extend your hand and do a handshake if people are still doing handshakes anymore. But until you get to know them no closer, and the people that we really care about, well, maybe they'll come in for a hug. And so you get very close. In other cultures, particularly cultures where they have a phenomenal amount of population, like a very large population, there is not very much space, maybe enough for an envelope between you, simply because there's too many people. And here in Canada, well, we don't have that kind of a problem typically unless you go to the ball game, the football game and the stadium and there's, 40,000 people there. Well, that's an unusual scenario. And in that case, most people do pay attention to, okay, how much space is around me, and they'll move in a way to create more space for themselves. So it's a comfort level thing that is, again, part of our built-in safety mechanism for survival is part of that. And so then, of course, we can take a look at, well, what about our emotional boundaries, our mental boundaries? Where do we go with that? Our values play a key role in there as well. So what you value in life will have a role. So I came full face with opportunity to look at someone's behavior, which I consider to be unethical. And I thought, no, I'm not doing business with them because their actions displayed this unethical behavior, which was not acceptable to me. And so that was part of my growing up, was to decide, all right, what's moral, what's ethical, what's legal, all of these kinds of issues that we explore from the time we're old enough to begin thinking about it. You know, we're taught probably young, don't take somebody else's possessions from them because that belongs to them. And so don't steal was the big thing. Or if you want to use it, ask permission first. And so I had situations in my young adult life where people borrowed things without asking permission. I was annoyed because I thought, well, wait a minute. I don't mind you using it, but ask me first so that I have control of whether I give you permission or not. You know, it took away my power, and I didn't like that, and my ability to choose. Isn't it interesting that's a lot of what this is about when we think of the power that we have, the freedom that we have to make choices? Then we establish these limits or these boundaries in order to maintain that level right there. And so, well, people can go this far, but they can't go any farther. So you see why I was kind of puzzled about all of this, because it's a complex topic. It's not just one thing or another. And of course, it shifts and changes. My limitations or my limits when I was growing up have refined themselves and shifted and changed based on the circumstances or the experiences that I have, and so on. So, for example, when I had fewer physical limitations, I had lots of energy and I was fit and so on at 18. Well, I could go for a hike and not even think twice about it, even though I maybe wasn't in shape for doing a long hike. Off I'd go because it didn't feel like I was limited in any way. Well, at my age and stage of life now, I mean, yeah, I might think about it twice and say, well, let's build up to that. Oh, Sue, do you want to run or walk a marathon? Not at this point, I don't. Maybe after I've had a little movement into that and increased every day, well, eventually maybe I can. But at this moment, no, I'm not doing that. You know, I'm not going to rappel down the outside of a building, as sexy as that looks, because yeah, I'm not that fond of heights, and that's a long way down. So have I limited myself? Yes, I have. In other areas, I don't have as many limitations because I'm open to exploring, open to pursuing something that's important to me. So we set these boundaries and limitations for good reasons, and sometimes we forget that we set them, and then we bump up against that boundary and get an opportunity to decide, well, maybe that's not serving me. Maybe that's blocking me from getting where I want to go. And fear, of course, plays a huge role in all of that, because our ego wants above everything, to keep us safe. And if there's even any glimmer that we might not be safe, either physically, mentally, emotionally, or whatever, it'll say hard pass. No, we're not doing that. Oh, no. That's too dangerous. You don't want to do that. Well, if we question it, we might say, well, okay, what's that all about? Like my trepidation around horses. I came right up to something that had limited me for many years. I maybe had ridden 2 horses since that first incident when I was about 14. And so I just stayed away from horses, and I was edgy around them and nervous around them, and I didn't like that. I didn't want to be, but I was, because there was this inner memory, not only of what had happened, but then the fear that was left as part of that. And so I faced it head on. And fortunately, I'm surrounded by cool people who know how to do this, and these amazing horses who were there for that specific purpose. And they allowed me to get closer and closer to feel what I was feeling in that moment, and enable me to kind of get rid of the scar tissue from that, and to have new skin around horses. So it was a huge gift that I gave myself, because I wanted to go outside the boundary that I had set and see what would happen, to explore that. And I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but the gifts from that have been quite significant since then. And just that one act of testing my boundaries in that regard, and then deciding that I could expand myself more in that area. I could be more of who I was in relation to these beautiful animals that have hearts as big as all outdoors. Well, it's helped me in other capacities as well. So this, hence my exploration of, okay, what about boundaries? One of my big questions in relation to that was, can our boundaries limit our growth? And I think yes, based on whether it's coming out of fear. Now, if it's coming out of preservation and something is extremely dangerous, and it's coming out of preservation and some fear, well, you can say a hard no. No, 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 not doing that. Other things are more important than that. So I can hang on to that boundary and say, no, I'm not doing that. But in areas where it's affecting our ability to grow and to expand into who I think we really are, and maybe have a desire to be, then it's to have a look at that and say, what is stopping me here? Having to explore that and say, oh, okay. So this is where having a conversation with others can be helpful. Some journaling would be helpful on that too, to say, well, what is my yes and what is my no? So when I was doing online dating a number of years ago, of course, they encourage you to do your most preferred, like what's your ideal mate, and what's an absolute must. They absolutely must have or be this, and this. So you do your list. And then you do another list and say, okay, here's my preferences. I would prefer that they're this, and this. And then, of course, the absolute no, the hard pass, like if they have any of this, not happening. So, of course, one of mine was, in the hard pass, was no smokers, not any way, shape, or form, not going to go there. So that was a big deal for me. And then I had all of these other parameters. Well, we established that, but then, of course, we meet someone and we start kind of experimenting with, okay, what of what I said I most wanted and would prefer and absolutely didn't want, is that all still acceptable? And so we experiment with that a little bit. And you may have in your younger days come face to face, like I did as a 20-something, I was brought up with no sex before marriage as an example. And so I had an opportunity to explore that for myself and say, well, is that really true for me? And at the time it was. And then, well, I get a little older and I think, well, okay, is it okay now? And so I got a chance to explore that again. Well, what about casual sex? Is that acceptable to you? Not anybody else. Never mind what a society has its own dictates and its own norms, and different groups have a hard yes or a hard no, or you decide it. I mean, there's everything there that gives you information, but it's, well, what does my heart say? What's in my heart that's important to me? What do I value most? There's the deciding factor right there. If it's important to me from a values perspective and my heart is fully engaged in it in a loving way, it's nothing to do with fear. It has to do with, I love myself enough to decide based on what I value the most, what's most important to me. And then that makes it way easier to do the sifting and the sorting, because my mind has just been buzzing in 84 directions over the last 3 weeks, sorting this out until I came to the simplified, well, it boils down to yes or no. Not maybe, yes or no. Yes, that fits for me, works for me. I'd love that. Or no, absolutely not. I wouldn't. The challenge is hanging out in the confusion of, well, maybe. And so then I do the dissection. Well, on the one hand, and I'd have all of these pros and cons here. And then on the other hand, and I'd try to look at both sides and then the other sides. And well, if I had gone straight to how does that feel in my heart? What's the most loving thing for me to do for myself in relation to this right now, right in this instant? Then the decision for me became way easier. There was some clarity that came out of that I hadn't seen before. I think that is probably one of the biggest gifts out of exploring any of these issues is the clarity. I'm looking for clarity. Well, once I have some clarity in any situation, then of course it's easier to make the decision. I may not know what that decision is going to be until I have the clarity, but at least, and I try it on in my physical being, well, does that speak to my heart, or is my heart pounding and saying, yeah, don't do that? Then the signals are there. The body knows. Well, I'll test it out. So that's what I wanted to cover with you this week. So what I want to challenge you with is to look at the boundaries that you've set or you're thinking of setting or others have encouraged you to set. Oh, you need a boundary there. You can't just, go willy-nilly looking after everybody and never looking after yourself. You need to learn how to say no. Been there, done that. I know how that goes. And I'm still challenged in this day and age because I used to believe that if I couldn't find a good reason for saying no, then I had to say yes. Sometimes it is a no because it's not right now. Or let me think about it. Or you want to pause in some way to allow yourself time. Just because somebody asks you, you don't need an immediate yes or no. You can slow the process down and say, actually, I need to think about that for a little while before I give you an answer. Let me get back to you. Is that okay? It may not be for them. Maybe they want a yes or no right then, in which case, well, then it's a no. If you want me to decide in this second, it's a no, because I don't feel comfortable saying yes and I don't know why. So I need time to sort that out. So play with that, my magnificent ones, and see where you get. Leave me a comment. I'd love to entertain a dialogue about this. And you know that if you want more on Magnify Your Magnificence, you can always go to magnifywithsue.com. We have a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to for more information. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to start talking about a free workshop that you can come to, all about the Magnificence Matrix, a tool that will help you navigate through the somewhat murky waters of life towards your own magnificence. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, go be your magnificent selves. We'll see you again on Magnify Your Magnificence.